Today we're going to take a look into side spin. Now this is probably the most requested topic, certainly the topic I get the most messages and comments about is how we play with side spin. And the first thing I want to say is playing with side spin, you are adding to the tariff of potting. It makes potting a lot harder, so only play with side spin when you really need to for positional purposes of the shot. Now I'm going to explain why it adds to the tariff of potting in this video. And the first thing we need to know is when we play a pot with right hand side, so we hit the right hand side of the cue ball, that is going to deflect the cue ball to the left. So the cue ball is going to go to the left and vice versa. So we play a shot with left hand side, it's going to deflect the cue ball to the right. Now the amount it deflects will depend on a few variables, and the main ones being the pace you play the shot at and the amount you play to the left or right, so the amount of spin you put on the ball and the pace of the shot. Let me show you here. If I play this shot with a nice medium pace with as much right hand side as I can get on the ball, it will deflect the cue ball to the left, and I'll miss the pot. You can see that deflected a long way. So just to show you both sides of it, let me try and play the same shot, straight pot, and I am trying to pot this straight, by the way. I'm not moving the cue ball anyway. Let me try and do the same thing but with left hand side, and you can see it goes the other way. So now that we know that the cue ball will deflect, we then have to adjust our aim to compensate for that deflection. So for example, let's try and play the same shot again. So if I play this with right hand side, so I'm going to play it with as much right hand side as I can get on it with a medium pace, we know the cue ball is going to deflect to the left, so we know the cue ball is going to go that way. So to compensate for that, I have to adjust my aim. So rather than aiming for the center of the pocket, which is full ball, I'd have to aim further to the right, so that when it deflects to the left, I'm going to be closer to the center of the ball again, so to make the pot. So by aiming a little bit further on the right hand side, I'm actually probably aiming to hit this jaw. And again, the aim will depend on the amount of spin and the amount of pace you play it at, but this is just a rough guide. Let me see if I can get closer to making the pot if I adjust my aim. You can see the amount of spin I've got on the ball, it's there spinning on the center of the table with the spots on it, and you can see I managed to make the pot. But let's get another ball out and just see if I can make the pot just the opposite spin. So this time I'm going to play it with left hand side. Again, the same pace as I played it before, left hand side, which means the cue ball is going to come across to the right. So to be able to make the pot, I now need to adjust my aim. So I'm going to be aiming for the opposite jaw this time. So I'm aiming further on the left hand side of the ball because the cue ball is going to deflect to the right. So that's how I'm going to adjust, and let's see if I can make it this way. Yeah, so you can see the deflection, and I managed to make the pot, but you could see the ball spinning after contact as well. So that is how you'd have to adjust for the deflection, and it will, as I said earlier, it is judging how much you need to adjust for deflection will depend on the pace of the shot you play at and the amount of spin. So the more pace you play at, the more it's going to deflect, and the more spin you play with, the more it's going to deflect as well. So you have to take those two things into consideration when playing the shot. So we talked about deflection and the amount the cue ball will move depending on the pace and the amount of spin you put on the ball. Now we need to look at the spin actually on the cue ball and the effect that has on the shot. If we play a shot with right or left hand side, the cue ball, as we know, will deflect. But what we haven't talked about is it will actually the cue ball will start to move, it will arc back. So if we played a shot here with right hand side, the cue ball will deflect to the left, but the spin will take and it will start to come back to the right. And again, depending on the amount of spin and the pace you play the shot at will depend on how much it comes back. Now the reason we didn't see it coming back when I showed you the deflection was that there wasn't much gap between the balls, but we're also playing it with quite a lot of pace. So it's deflecting and it hasn't had time for the spin to take and for it to come back. If I play this same shot slightly slower, again with the same extreme right hand side on it, we should see it deflect to the left just less, much less, but it will also come back online. So if I aim straight, try and pot this one straight pot, I'm not adjusting my aim at all, we should still go very close to making the pot if we play it slower. can see the spin on the ball, so we're still getting that right hand side. It's a very marginal amount because of the pace I played it at. It deflected marginally to the left, the spin brought it back online, and we were still able to make the pot. Let me show you the same but the other way around. So this time I'm going to attempt to make the pot with left hand side. The cue ball will deflect marginally to the right because I'm going to play it slowly, and then the spin's going to take, it's going to come back, and we're not going to be far off the potting angle. I am aiming straight. Let's see if that happens. Again, you can see the spin was still on the cue ball there as it was as it reached the object ball, and we were still able to make the pot. So that's another thing that you have to take into consideration when playing with side. Deflection will move the cue ball out. The spin on the ball will bring it back online, or could go past online depending on the distance there is between the ball you're playing and the object ball, also the pace you're playing the shot at, and also the amount of spin you're playing the shot with. So there's an awful lot to take into consideration. Well, that's the two big talking points with side spin that you're going to have to really understand: the deflection and the spin on the cue ball, the amount it's going to move and come back. So you have to start to understand that, but there are a few other things you need to take into consideration. As I've already touched on, the gap between the balls, that is going to have a big effect. The less gap between the balls, the less time there is for the ball to deflect and come back. The bigger the gap, the more time there is for the ball to move back, so you have to sort of take that into consideration as well. Other things to think about: the cue you're using, believe it or not, actually is going to have a big effect. Different cues will deflect more or less. It's one of the big reasons I think go out there and get yourself a cue if you haven't already, and make sure that you're always playing with the same cue, because the amount of spin and the amount of deflection will be the same every time if you're always using your cue rather than it being another variable to consider. Something else would be the table. Tables will play differently, especially with the cloths, different pace of cloth. Does it have a nap on the cloth? All these things you have to take into consideration and will have an effect on the amount that the balls will deflect and spin back. So as you can tell there's a lot of different variables that you have to take into consideration, and it's one of the reasons why I say playing with side spin is very difficult. It is going to add to the complexity of all the pots you take on with side spin. So in my opinion, you want to play with side spin as little as possible. I've shown other videos where I've highlighted how you can access huge parts of the table just by going up and down the center of the cue ball. So for me, don't use side spin unless you feel you really need it. And if you do feel you need it, then use it within reason. So don't just go, I need to play this shot with right hand side, and go straight for extreme right hand side. Go for subtle amounts. So if you feel like you need to just widen an angle off the cushion, you play with just a trace of side. That means you're much more likely to be able to control the potting angle. The cue ball isn't going to deflect as much, it's not going to spin back as much, so you get much more control of the pot still, and then you're getting subtle control of the positional side of it as well. But to get to grips with that, there's only one way to do it, and that is to go out there and practice and learn it and start to really feel it for yourself. I can't tell you to play with X amount of spin, you have to allow for a certain amount of aim to the left or right, because it's different for every single player. So the only way to really get to grips with this is go and learn it for yourself. I hope this video has helped give you a basic understanding of some of the things that are going on when playing with side spin. And it is a tricky, as I've highlighted, it is a very tricky thing to understand, or certainly to get to grips with. We will do more videos on side spin in the future, and some of the other things we need to potentially take into consideration, and some of the things we can do with it. But for now, I think this is a really good intro into side spin. I hope it's been a good video. Comment below, I'd love to hear from you guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and of course, as always, if you've enjoyed this video, then please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. Got plenty more content on the way, and thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.